Trump, Iran, and the bomb. Did the U.S. just win a war that isn't over? At the recent NATO summit, Donald Trump stepped up to the microphone and declared what he called a historic victory. With characteristic bravado, he claimed that the United States had completely obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities, putting an end not only to Tehran's nuclear ambitions, but also to the long-running tensions between Iran and Israel. In his words, the conflict was over. Trump also said there was no need for further negotiations with Iran, adding that he had asked his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to draw up a treaty for Iran to sign, but then changed his mind. Why? Because, in his view, the Iranians were exhausted. They were done. They wouldn't pursue nuclear weapons anymore. But behind the soundbites lies a different story, one filled with contradictions, global mistrust, and dangerous assumptions. Intelligence officials were more cautious in their assessment. Preliminary reports from both United States and Israeli intelligence agencies indicate that the airstrikes had not completely destroyed Iran's nuclear program. At best, they had delayed it. At worst, they had driven it deeper underground. This is Nexus-Feed Deep Dive Session, and in this video, we're unpacking the truth behind Trump's claims, revisiting the nuclear deal he abandoned, examining the real impact of the recent bombings, and asking a critical question: did the United States just win a war that hasn't even ended? Let's get started. At the 2025 NATO summit in The Hague, United States President Donald Trump took the stage and made headlines with a sweeping set of declarations. According to him, the United States airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities had completely destroyed the country's capacity to develop nuclear weapons. He spoke of the Israel-Iran conflict in past tense, suggesting the struggle had ended because both sides were exhausted. He even said he'd considered asking Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whom he referred to as the Secretary of War, to draft up an agreement for Iran to sign. But then, in typical Trump fashion, he claimed he'd changed his mind, asserting that Iran no longer needed convincing, that they were finished, done, that their nuclear ambitions had collapsed under the weight of American brute air bombardment. It was a bold story, but like so many of Trump's public declarations, it crumbled under scrutiny. Preliminary joint intelligence assessments from both the United States and Israel offered a more sobering perspective. The strikes, while symbolically significant and tactically impressive, still needed to be verified by human intelligence to determine the true impact. Clearly, above-ground structures were destroyed. Some centrifuge halls were hit. But Iran's nuclear program is decentralized, partially buried deep underground, and in many ways designed to withstand this very kind of assault in mind. The conclusion from analysts: the program has been set back by at most a few years, but it is not completely obliterated. Trump's declaration of victory may serve his political narrative, but in strategic terms, it's premature and honestly, potentially reckless. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to 2015. That year, a major diplomatic breakthrough occurred. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was signed between Iran and 6 world powers: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China. The agreement was born from years of deadlock, covert operations, and back-channel talks. At the heart of the deal was a simple premise: Iran would severely curtail its nuclear program in exchange for economic relief from crushing international sanctions. Iran agreed to reduce its stockpile of enriched uranium by 98% and keep enrichment levels at just 3.67%, a level far below what's needed for a weapon. It agreed to limit the number of operational centrifuges to just over 5,000, all of them older, less efficient models. Iran also pledged not to build any new heavy water reactors, which could be used to produce plutonium. But the most crucial part was verification. The deal granted the International Atomic Energy Agency unprecedented access to Iranian facilities. Inspectors had daily access to enrichment sites like Natanz and Fordow. Surveillance cameras were installed. Data was continuously collected and reviewed. From 2015 until 2018, the deal held. Multiple IAEA reports confirmed Iran's compliance. Enrichment was kept in check. Research was limited. Iran's breakout time, the time it would take to produce enough fissile material for one bomb, was extended to over a year. For the first time in over a decade, the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran had been contained. In Iran, moderate factions gained political ground. The economy began to show signs of recovery. The then president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani's government promoted international engagement, and the global community, though cautious, acknowledged a rare diplomatic success. But then came Trump's first term. The 2016 U.S. election changed everything. President Trump, elected in part on the promise of undoing Obama-era policies, sought to unilaterally withdraw the United States from the JCPOA. From the outset, Trump vowed to dismantle what he labeled a disaster of a deal. Despite overwhelming support for the JCPOA from U.S. allies and repeated verification from the IAEA, Trump argued the deal was fundamentally flawed. He objected to the sunset clauses, which would allow certain restrictions to expire within a decade. He criticized the deal for failing to address Iran's ballistic missile program, its regional interventions, and its support for groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis. He accused Iran of using the money gained from sanctions relief to fund terrorism across the Middle East. So, in May 2018, Trump formally withdrew the United States from the JCPOA. He reinstated harsh economic sanctions and launched what he called a maximum pressure campaign. The hope here was that by wrecking Iran's economy, Tehran would be forced back to the negotiating table to accept a broader and tougher agreement. But Iran didn't return to the table. Instead, Tehran gradually began violating the terms of the deal. First, it breached uranium stockpile limits. Then, it started enriching to higher levels. Eventually, it installed advanced centrifuges. Most critically, it reduced IAEA access and inspections. This wasn't an immediate sprint to a bomb, but it was definitely a deliberate escalation. Meanwhile, the Iranian economy collapsed. Inflation skyrocketed. The currency lost much of its value, and unemployment soared. But rather than break the regime, the pressure actually consolidated power among hardliners. Reformists and moderates were discredited, while the Revolutionary Guard tightened its grip. For a time, Iran adopted a strategy of calibrated defiance. It didn't rush to weaponize its nuclear program. Instead, it moved methodically, gradually ramping up its capabilities while still signaling openness to diplomacy. But as efforts to revive the deal faltered, first under Trump, then under a divided U.S. Congress during Biden's administration, Tehran shifted its posture. Between 2019 and 2023, the U.S.-Iran relationship deteriorated into a cycle of provocations and retaliations. The assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in early 2020 marked a major escalation. Iran responded with missile attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq. Cyber attacks increased. Proxy conflicts intensified across the region. By 2022, enrichment had reached 60% purity. That's, well, alarmingly close to weapons grade. Iranian scientists pushed forward with research into uranium metallurgy, a critical step in weaponization. Stockpiles of enriched uranium multiplied. Facilities like Fordow and Natanz were fortified and expanded. While there was no public evidence of a bomb being built, the technical capability was now within reach. Western intelligence began to warn that Iran's breakout time, the time needed to produce enough fissile material for a bomb, had dropped from a year to just a few weeks. And yet Tehran remained officially committed to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. the situation had become unsustainable. The Biden administration attempted to re-enter the JCPOA but faced both domestic opposition and Iranian reluctance. Iran demanded compensation for past breaches. The talks stalled. When Trump returned to office in 2025, he inherited a crisis far more complex than what Obama handed him in 2017. Iran was now closer than ever to the nuclear threshold. When Iranian-backed militants struck Israeli assets in 2025, the response was swift. Israel later launched airstrikes on suspected nuclear infrastructure. The United States joined days later, signaling its renewed willingness to use force. The campaign targeted multiple facilities, including Natanz, Arak, and Isfahan. Airstrikes were precise and focused. Above-ground enrichment halls were bombed. Warehouses, research labs, and command centers near Natanz and Fordow, known to house advanced centrifuge systems and uranium enrichment labs, were hit. The damage was significant, but the real challenge was a fortified facility buried beneath a mountain in Fordow. Despite advanced bunker-busting munitions, the Fordow site reportedly sustained only limited damage. It is not clear if much of its enrichment infrastructure remained intact. Iran quickly claimed that the core of its program survived, but Western analysts are not convinced. In public, U.S. President Donald Trump declared total victory. In private, though, officials were less certain. The initial battle damage assessments suggested at least a year or two setback. The physical infrastructure had been disrupted, but the expertise, the material, and the motivation remained. By returning to military action without a diplomatic safety net, the U.S. and Israel may have merely accelerated Iran's underground strategy. Intelligence also suggests that in the wake of the bombings, Tehran has begun relocating key operations to even deeper underground facilities, some possibly beyond the reach of conventional weapons. So, was it a victory? On the battlefield, perhaps. But in the broader strategic picture, the jury is still out. Had the U.S. remained in the JCPOA, could all of this have been avoided? This is the question that now haunts policymakers. The available evidence suggests that Iran was compliant from 2015 until the U.S. withdrawal. The inspections worked. The enrichment stayed within limits. The diplomatic channels, however fragile, remained open. The decision by the Trump administration to abandon the deal in 2018 set off a chain reaction. It empowered hardliners in Iran and weakened moderates. It shattered trust. And honestly, it brought us to the brink of another major Middle Eastern war. When the deal collapsed, so did the framework for accountability. Without inspections, suspicion filled the vacuum. And without diplomatic engagement, confrontation became inevitable. It's not that the deal was perfect. Far from it. It's that abandoning it created a vacuum no one was ready to fill. And now, that vacuum has been filled by bombs. The lesson to be drawn from this is not just about Iran. It's about the fragility of international diplomacy in the age of polarization and populism. Agreements require continuity. Trust is hard-earned and easily lost. When one administration trashes the commitments of the last, adversaries learn that patience outlasts policy. Trump's claim that the conflict is over may serve a political narrative, but it defies every available fact. Iran and Israel remain on opposing sides of a regional Cold War. Tehran continues to fund Hezbollah in Lebanon and proxy forces in Syria and Iraq. Tel Aviv remains committed to preventing a nuclear Iran at any cost. Fatigue does not equal resolution, and exhaustion does not lead to peace without negotiation. For Trump to declare the issue closed, without an agreement, without inspections, and without a change in Iran's behavior is either dangerously naive or deeply cynical. Either way, it ignores the lessons of the last 2 decades. Looking forward, the situation remains volatile. Iran may choose to bide its time, rebuild in the shadows, and avoid further escalation, for now. But its long-term objectives haven't changed. The risk of proxy retaliation is high. Militias in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon may step up attacks. Maritime security in the Gulf could deteriorate, and regional rivals, including Saudi Arabia and Turkey, may accelerate their own nuclear hedging programs. Meanwhile, the diplomatic space has shrunk. Trust is low. The European Union, China, and Russia have little leverage. And in Washington, election year politics leave little room for nuance. There is still a path to de-escalation, but it would require leadership, compromise, and a willingness to return to the negotiating table. So far, none of those ingredients are present. In 2015, the world stood at a crossroads. Through diplomacy, transparency, and compromise, the JCPOA created a framework that reduced tensions and delayed a major conflict. In 2018, that framework was discarded. In 2025, bombs replaced diplomacy. And now, we are left with the illusion of resolution, projected through press conferences and slogans. But behind that illusion lies a region still on edge, a program still alive, and a world still dangerously close to the brink. This isn't peace. It's a pause, a momentary silence before the next phase of confrontation. And unless diplomacy returns to center stage, it's not a question of if this conflict reignites, but when. You've been watching Nexus-Feed. As a new channel, we need your support to reach a wider audience. If you found this deep dive insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. So, has America bought time, or just invited the next crisis? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section too. And until our next one, stay curious, stay critical, and keep the good people of Iran in your thoughts.